Okay. This is the Architecture Lobby's interview with Future Architects Front for the Venice Biennale. And we're super excited that y'all are able to join us. We've been talking to so many incredible organizations like yours and learning about the really powerful organizing work they're doing within the architectural profession and the built environment in general. We'd love to just kick it off with getting to know everybody. I'll start real quick. My name is John Ludlam. I pronounce it he and him, and I'm a designer based in Brooklyn, New York. I'll hand it off to y'all.
Hey, I'm Charlie, pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the co-founders of Future Architects Front with Priti. I also work at an organization called Civic Square and teach at the London School of Architecture.
Hi, I'm Priti. My pronouns are she, her. I am a member of FAF, and I also just completed my PhD at Cambridge in urban geography, and I trained in architecture and urban design, and teach a little bit with Charlie every now and then.
And just real quick, could we get like a two-sentence idea of like what is FAF? What is Future Architects Front?
Yeah, sure. It is at its most basic form, a sort of social media presence. But I suppose what it intends to do is it kind of intends to act as a sort of vehicle for trying to build class consciousness amongst architectural workers. And we do this through a number of different ways, be that kind of like, um, I suppose, finding uh, joy and like liberation through the pain of practicing architecture, often through kind of like comedic posts, but also we do interviews sometimes, we teach, we lecture, we run campaigns. So we try and kind of make the most of the fact that, like, in many ways, FAF isn't real. It's just a kind of like online platform that can be very responsive, doesn't really have to go through any slow deliberative processes, and can just be very sort of like agile towards those aims that I outlined.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess also we just want to learn a bit more about the organization. So I guess my first question is, what are one or two key problems that you engage with that you or other architecture workers face?
Yeah, so I guess connected to what I was saying about the sort of main goals of FAF, we think that one of the biggest barriers in kind of the progress of the conditions of architectural workers are rooted in the fact that you can't organize as a worker until you realize that you're a worker. And for the vast majority of architects, this is a real problem because historically we exist in a professional context where architects have very much been kind of representatives of the client or representatives of kind of the capital that exists in built environment production. And if we look at the field historically, architecture used to get a kind of somewhat better remunerated part of that pie. Whereas over the years, as kind of neoliberal policies have emerged, mainly in the UK and the US, the kind of reduction of protections of architectural practice, the kind of degradation of building regulations and standards. This has all kind of contributed to a sort of competitive race to the bottom in terms of lowering fees, therefore lowering salaries, therefore lowering the quality of actual architectural work as we try and do everything faster and more efficiently. And so the kind of main problem that FAF is trying to address is that the majority of architects do not see themselves within this kind of political economic history. They see themselves almost as kind of isolated design spatial practitioners with no dependencies on any of these histories or political economic context, and therefore they kind of missed the primary uh, systemic factors that determine how they're able to work. So for us, the main kind of goal is to make this context visible, make this political economic context visible, and then try and help supply knowledge of the tools that architects and workers can use to leverage and engage in these systemic contexts. So we kind of see ourselves as trying to almost build the class consciousness of the profession, helping people realize that they are workers so that they can then look at spaces like unions, like direct action, like policy, and get a better sense of the landscape that they can engage in to create actual substantive change rather than sort of tinkering at the ineffective edges of sort of design practice. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on, Priti.
Yeah, I also think that the impacts that we're seeing, which are kind of unforeseen, is how early this knowledge is starting to become conscious. So I interview incoming undergraduate students for architecture, and quite a number of them wanted to talk about FAF. And all these issues around labor, around practice, around education, around choice in education, are seeming to become very relevant at a much younger age compared to when we started architecture school. I don't think we thought of our work as labor. It was the art form that we did. It was something that we gave our heart, soul, and blood to. So I think one of the beautiful things about FAF is the range of accessible tools that have been created. So what started off with memes has turned into talks and lectures and teaching and all sorts of forms of engagement, podcasts. And this information is really starting to proliferate, and young people are talking to each other about it. People are 16, 17. So the earlier that consciousness is embedded, the kind of more power that can be created amongst architectural workers as they progress through the profession, which ultimately is of good to everyone.
Yeah, and I don't think it's kind of a coincidence that so many shared organizing goals have emerged around such a similar time as well. Like if you look at this globally, the increase of like union organizing across the world, the emergence of
Mm.
like the architecture lobby, FAF, ACAN, a lot of these groups started to emerge kind of around similar times towards the end of the 2010s, early 2020s. And I think a lot of this kind of transition towards more class consciousness, particularly amongst younger architectural workers and students, comes from the fact that we're kind of hitting bedrock, I think, now in terms of the exploitative nature of working in architecture practice. I don't know if it's the same in the US context, but in the UK, we're at a point now where through FAF, we are having to every year tell people what a full-time minimum wage salary is because it is very, very common for architectural practices to offer salaries below minimum wage now, if you calculate it according to the full-time hours. And if you look at the salaries reported by industry bodies like the Royal Institute of British Architects, they will report that their practices are paying below these minimum wages. So there is, I think the reason why you're starting to see this kind of wave of labor organizing and increased class consciousness, it's nothing to do with how incredible all of these organizations are as organizers, though I do have a huge amount of respect for everyone doing this kind of work, obviously. But I think it's the fact that we've almost reached a kind of historic moment in the standards of architectural practice where you can't really go any lower than this. Like we are already at the point where we are, having to forcefully like drag people above the minimum wage line and publicly shame practices who aren't paying these kinds of salaries. So I think a lot of the context that we're responding to, it, we did make the decision to respond to it. We did make the decision to create FAF, but the real origin of this work, I think, is the fact that the bar can't really go any lower.
Wow, that is really horrifying. Um, yeah. Um, but I think uh in some ways it kind of leads into the next question well. And I think Preeti, especially what you're saying about talking to new practitioners or people coming into undergrad. Um, in that sense, reaching people at that stage is also really exciting. And yeah, so what's your vision for the future of architecture?
I think it's a absolute emphasis, not just emphasis, a need for social and political justice to be embedded through processes and education through the entire thing. And it's essentially for architects to be able to say no, um, which is a strong political standpoint that I think a lot of people are very scared to do because of all these other pressures that are on you in terms of the industry and in terms of the profession, which seems so dislocated from what we study and the thing that we love when we're in education, where you can put social justice at the forefront, where architecture can be seen as this collective good that benefits all, where you can really be in service to communities and to people. And that is not the way the machine of architecture is working in its most dominant form. So for me, that future is to really push on the social and political justice side of things, and to be able to consider things like gender, to be able to consider things like identity, race, class, culture, all of these things which are so informed and influenced and influence the built environment are integral parts of the practice that need to be claimed and need to be seen and as part of our identity as practitioners, as architects, as built environment workers. I think it is about removing the profit side of things and the competitive side of things, and even the competitiveness with architectural workers and architects, to have more collective engagement, more collaboration, and to engage with other movements like with climate change, with gender justice and racial justice. So that's how I see the future.
Yeah, I think, and for me, there's a kind of inevitability to the radical changes that we're talking about. Because if we look at the outcomes of architectural practice today, we know that 40% of global carbon emissions can be accounted for from the built environment. In the UK, over 60% of all landfill and material waste is a result of construction directly. And we know that these outcomes aren't aren't tenable. Like we literally will not be able to keep operating in this way because of inevitable climate and ecological tipping points that this will lead to. So the practice of architecture is going to change radically, whether we're prepared for it or not. And I think from our point of view, the the real big determining factors is how quickly can we work towards a field and a profession that truly understands this, and what are we doing both to kind of prepare for this emerging shift in practice where suddenly our kind of go-to materials like steel and concrete are no longer ecologically viable. And how do we simultaneously, as a profession, prepare for these incoming material limitations whilst also investing in the political initiatives and organizing to actually like shift the political economic containers we exist within to make it so that we can even do anything about these material limitations rather than just kind of putting our foot down harder on the accelerator pedal towards climate collapse. So I think, yeah, a lot of this for us is about these kind of twin tracks of inevitable material limitations of our social, ecological present and future, and the way that you try and then organize as workers in and beyond architecture try and respond to those limitations and kind of steer the wider economy towards more kind of regenerative directions that truly put social and planetary needs at the heart of why we do everything that we do.
Yeah, and this isn't a vision for a distant future. I do think we're at a moment of rupture. I think there's radical change happening. We're seeing it in the organizing, we're seeing it in the movements among students, workers. This is immediate and it's happening. And I think that if this momentum keeps pushing, it's a really exciting future that's coming.
Well, that was super invigorating. And thank you for that. And I feel like from on my own note, but also for the architectural lobbyist note, like it's so exciting to be able to talk to all of these folks, including yourselves, that are doing this organizing because, when we look around and, if you're talking to folks, your coworkers or the folks in your city, and then you broaden your scope and you see, oh, there are people, on, different continents and, different countries thinking about the same exact things, facing some of the same systems that might be expressing themselves a bit differently in different contexts, but at their core have the same goals. Um, it's exciting to see people like offering different alternatives to those goals, and especially with the understanding of uh, this is immediate. This is things are going to change, and it's exciting to put forward visions of that change and to shape it in a particular way for the betterment of workers and the humanity in general. Um, so unless there are any closing thoughts, I'll leave the floor open to that. Actually, are there any closing thoughts?
I guess for me, just that like there is evidence of, I suppose, what that future can look like. In
Mm,
the UK, in particular, if you look at the post-war years, that was the time when you did get great socially oriented programs like the NHS, like community libraries, and you can see directly the way that these initiatives not only enriched the built environment and architectural practice through things like public housing or public libraries and buildings, but also enriched the social conditions and life in the country more broadly before all of that was kind of undone from the 80s onwards. But when we talk about these things, when we talk about kind of subordinating capital and contemporary practice to social and ecological outcomes, we're not just talking kind of completely in dreamland. Like this is something that has happened historically and something that can and must happen again.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, there's momentum building. You can feel it amongst students, you can feel it within practices. And I think it's really important that, FAF is not this standalone thing. It came from people, it came from the voices that we were around all the time. And I think that has to be happening at those micro scales. Like Charlie said, it's not just about these big grand gestures and these big grand revolutions. The big revolutions made up of tiny, tiny revolutions that need to be happening within these circles, within these micro moments, whether that's in the studio, in the corridors. Those moments are really important, and that's the fire and that's the flames that will keep burning and keep pushing this forward.
exactly. That's beautiful. Yeah. Um, Thank you so much, Future Architects Front, for talking with us. And we're really excited to see what comes next for y'all and to find out ways we can keep working together. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.